While everyone was being held hostage by one-shots these past few weeks, Blizzard finally woke up and posted some brand new tuning, casting an eviscerate on some of the most problematic specs in PvP. Well, at least that was the plan. Anyway, for the second week in a row, the PvP medallion set bonus was buffed to give everyone 5% more stamina, which could help slow the game down even more. But let's be honest, WoW PvP is unbelievably fast, especially now. You're still going to have to deal with the growing skill gap between players, which is getting bigger and bigger every season. If you're not up to date with the latest tech, you will fall behind. That's why we offer a rating gain guarantee at skillcap.com to make sure you can consistently rank up every single season. We give you every tool you would ever need to hit your goals, including the #1 UI for PvP with member-exclusive profiles designed to increase awareness and better your decision-making. And we only work with the best players in order to make the biggest collection of class guides on the internet, which we promise will help you deal more damage and healing in Arena, all while learning tons of min-maxing tricks that would take years to learn on your own. Don't let another season slip by. Join skillcap.com today and guarantee your climb across all of our games. For now, let's get back to the video. Let's kick things off by looking at the biggest changes coming to melee DPS this week. For some odd reason, Blizzard took aim at Frost DKs, who are basically the punching bags of PvP, hitting them with a nerf to some of their Frost Strike burst damage, which was compensated by a sustained damage buff to Frost Fever. For the meantime, this won't affect their rankings at all, and the nerf could be offset by people jumping over to the two-handed build, which relies more on Obliterate to deal damage. Moving on, Feral Druids were on one of their last lives this season until Blizzard stepped in and slapped on a 4% buff as if to say, that'll fix it. Feral was definitely struggling this season, and even though 4% doesn't seem like much, it's a bigger deal than most people realize. For now, we're going to be moving the spec up at least one tier. Next up, we have Survival Hunter, which was one of the specs doing problematic burst over the past few weeks. But not to worry, because Blizzard said enough is enough and hit Flanking Strike directly in the nuts with a 20% nerf. While this will help tone down their burst, Flanking Strike is such a small part of their overall damage, and we still think Survival will be one of the better specs in Solo Shuffle, at least at high MMR. And to address the apocalypse of Ret Paladins for the third expansion in a row, Blizzard decided that Hammer of Light needed a measly 15% nerf. Now, don't get us wrong, this is their #1 source of damage when playing Templar, but come on! While Ret Paladins are losing some of the high-impact burst that has helped carry them so far this season, the spec still has a lot going for it and could even avoid these nerfs by simply swapping hero specs. Combine this with the fact that there were even bigger nerfs to the other broken specs, we think Ret will come out of this nerf just fine. And to wrap up the melee changes, we have 2 specs getting buffed, including Sub-Rogues, who got a flat damage increase, coupled with a minor nerf to a burst modifier. Overall, we think this will help the spec in the long run, as it still seems heavily reliant on Shadow Blades in order to close out games. And finally, Arms Warriors received a flat 4% damage increase, which will help their overall rankings, but is probably not enough to move them to S tier. Right now, it seems clear that Fury is the better spec due to having some crazy damage output, and while a 4% damage buff might help close the gap, Fury will likely stay in the lead. And with that, we have our updated picture of the melee meta in Season 3, where we have made some additional adjustments since our update 2 weeks ago, including moving Fury Warrior and Enhancement Shaman up a tier, while moving Outlaw Rogue and Sub down to B, despite getting some buffs. Until we see less Rets in Arena, Rogues will definitely struggle. But now, let's pivot to look at what's going on in the ranged meta after this week's changes. Up first is Balanced Druid, who is seeing a sizable 50% nerf to Dream Burst, coupled with an obscure nerf to Starfire modifier for the Aloon's Chosen Hero spec. While the Dream Burst change will help lower some of their burst, the bulk of Boomy damage remains unchanged. Star Surge will still be their hardest hitting spell, and we don't expect these changes to have a super high impact at all. Balanced Druid will continue being very strong in the early season. Moving on, we're seeing some PvE-focused buffs to both Devastation and Augmentation Evoker. We already had Dev on the S tier, and that will continue to be true this week. In fact, with nerfs to Arcane Mage and Balanced Druid, there is now an even stronger argument that Devastation Evoker is actually the best caster in Solo Shuffle, despite having lower representation. BM Hunters were another S tier spec to receive buffs this week, which were targeted at the Dark Ranger hero spec. We had high hopes for Dark Ranger going into the patch, but it seems like most BM Hunters have stuck with Pack Leader. These changes will obviously close the gap a bit, but the fact remains that Beast Mastery is still going to be one of the best DPS overall in Solo Shuffle. Moving on, we have the news everyone was waiting for. Arcane Mage got hit with the most aggressive set of nerfs this week, aimed at scaling back their infamous barrage one-shots by toning down a bunch of modifiers, while also nerfing Arcane Phoenix in the process. At this point, it's very hard to predict where Arcane Mage will land, but we think it will be at least one tier lower for now. we might see Arcane Mages hop back on over to Spellslinger or even respec to Frost. That's right, because Frost Mage is getting a flat damage increase combined with a substantial buff to Glacial Spike. We think the flat damage buff alone is enough to move Frost Mage up at least to the A tier for now. But before you get too excited, there's a chance it could still be the weakest mage spec depending on how the Arcane changes play out. The removal of Time Anomaly in the 11.2 patch was pretty devastating for Frost, who is now extra reliant on Icy Veins in order to win games. Finally, Elemental Shamans are seeing an Earthshock buff of all things, combined with the 45th buff to the Tempest hero spec, which obviously hasn't caught on so far this expansion. While Ellie has low representation, we still think it's one of the best solo shuffle specs, stemming from the fact that it was already solid last season and it got one of the best tier sets in 11.2. Maybe we're high on Copium, but we don't think Ellie should be slept on anymore. Anyway, here we have the updated rankings for ranged DPS for this week. Just like Melee, we have made some additional adjustments, including moving Marks Hunters down. This is another spec some problematic burst with difficult matchups in Melee heavy lobbies. Again though, not much has changed on the S tier. Many of the best specs from last week will continue to be strong. Finally, let's take a look at what's happening on the healer side of things. Up first, we have a very small nerf to the Preservation Evoker tier set, which we should remind everyone is already nerfed in PvP. There's no doubt that Prez is one of the better healers in Shuffle currently, but its relative strength still depends on your experience. At the high end of the ladder, there is an argument for it being S tier, but we think for most players, it will still hover somewhere in A. Next up, we have Mistweaver Monk, who were on the receiving end of a pretty brutal nerf to Rushing Wind Kick. If we had to guess, this change was likely aimed at 2v2, where Mistweaver is extremely dominant. Unfortunately, in Solo Shuffle, a huge nerf to one of your biggest heals will be a bit problematic. Right now, Mistweaver Monks are in a catch-22. With the recent change to Vivacious Vivification, they rely on Rushing Wind Kick a lot, and can't really afford to go back to their traditional caster roots. Finally, we have a few sets of Priest buffs, including a bumped Power Word Shield and Atonement Healing for Disc. This was a spec that was definitely struggling this season, but now should be in the high tiers for most players. Until this point, Disc was lacking strong healing output, but with buffs to Power Word Shield and Atonement, we think it will be super competitive. Finally, we have a set of Archon buffs for Holy Priest, which isn't the hero spec they currently play, but you can't really complain. As we mentioned in our low MMR tier list, Holy is actually the best performing healer at lower ratings and was doing pretty solid in 3v3. In any case, while we doubt Archon will surpass Oracle, Holy will continue being a high tier healer across the entire ladder. For now, these are the updated rankings for every healer in Solo Shuffle. We expect Resto Shaman, Disc Priest, and Preservation Evoker to be the standouts this week, especially at higher ratings. And if you want to rank up fast this season, you need to check out our courses on how to counter every class in PvP. We've also got the best positioning guides on the internet and our famous class courses, which teach you how to master your spec. We take concepts and break them down into bite-sized pieces, kind of like quests, but instead of experience, you gain rating. We've also upgraded our UI in Season 3 with brand new features, including in-game BIS lists, and now complete 2-in-1 hot swapping between PvP and PvE. As always, we're continuing to offer our Rank Up Guarantee, where we literally promise you will gain rating by using our service. Be sure to click the link below to get started with an exclusive discount for Season 3. For now, we want to thank you all for watching. See you soon.